In this video, we are going to learn how to CAD with Onshape. Specifically, this is part 1, where we'll go over a brief introduction of Onshape, some of the tools it has to offer, basic sketches, and much more. The other parts will be even more comprehensive, and by the end of this whole series, you will know how to CAD almost anything, such as parts for your robot, or even a robot itself. So, first of all, what is CAD? CAD stands for Computer Aided Design, and it refers to any 2D or 3D computer-based software that allows you to design things. Now, there's a lot of software out there. You might have already used software such as Tinkercad or Fusion 360, but for now, I want you to put all of that in the back of your head because it's important to get the fundamentals down, so we should start from a clean slate. So before we even open up Onshape, we should understand how perspective works. So in other softwares such as Tinkercad, you have your workspace and you kind of just drag in 3D objects. Now those objects are automatically made for you and you make objects out of other objects. Onshape is different because it works in 2D sketches, right? So imagine any cylinder, right? On the screen here, I have a soda can. It's Coca-Cola because I like Coca-Cola, right? This looks like a normal Coke can. Now, if we take a side view of this Coca-Cola can, you'll see that it's actually just a rectangle. Now, obviously there's some edges and curves around the edges, but in essence, it's just a rectangle. And this is kind of what perspective is. If we look at this can from one angle, we see a shape, and we can use that shape to recreate the can. This is just one of the views of the entire soda can. If you look at the top view, now you'll see it's not a rectangle anymore, because now all we see is just the circle of the soda can. So understanding all these perspectives is key, because in Onshape we will create shapes in these 2D perspectives, and then we will extrude or add material to these 2D faces and make them 3D objects. So now let's go to Onshape. Okay, so when you open Onshape and finish all the setup, you'll be met with something that looks like this. Now, some things I like to do is, first of all, I like to change my units of measurement. So you click up here under my account and then preferences, you'll see a bunch of preferences. Now you can change to light to dark mode if you want. I personally prefer light mode for Onshape specifically, but the one thing that I always change is these length default units. Onshape puts it to inches, but for industry standard, millimeters are often better. Okay, on the screen, if you ever need to, you can also change things such as your keybinds and shortcuts and things like that. So it's always here. Okay, now let's click the Onshape logo to go back to the home screen. Now, what is all this? Right now it's just a white screen. So there's a bunch of tabs on the left. You have owned by me, recently opened, created by me, shared with me, and some other ones. So any files you create will go into this owned by me tab. So let's go ahead and create our first project. Let's name this first project. Now, once your project loads, you'll be met with this very complicated looking screen. Now, before we touch anything, let's look at this bottom row. Right here we have Part Studio 1 and Assembly 1. Now, in Onshape, a Part Studio, you can think of it as where you make your actual parts. So think of something like a car, right? You have parts in that car. You would have your engine, you would have your seats, you would have the frame of the car, windows, all that. That's what you would design and make in a part studio. Now, in the assembly tab, this is where you join or mate parts together. For example, you could combine your engine with the frame and add in things like screws. Using mates, you could connect all of them together in an assembly. So just to recap, a part studio is where you make your parts, and an assembly is where you assemble them. Okay, now in the part studio, if you hold down right click, you can rotate around a point. If you hold down the middle click, you're able to pan the screen. If you scroll, you're able to zoom, and then clicking selects, and you can select multiple things. Okay, so if we go back to our slideshow about perspectives, right? So you'll see we have 3 planes here. A plane is like a 2D surface. So we have a front plane, a right plane, and a top plane. If you look in the top right, we also have this box that lets you can click a plane and it will automatically take you to that view. For example, if I was looking at that soda can from earlier from up top, I would click the top view and it would be a circle. Over here you also have some extra options. Most of these you might not really need to ever use, but they're there if you need to. Up here there's a bunch of tools. Many of them you will probably not need, but they're all here, and if you can always hover over them and see what they each do. Let's start by trying to make our own soda can. Now from the top view, our soda can was just a circle, right? If we're looking at a soda can from the top, it's a circle. So up here, let's click sketch, which would make a new sketch. And right now you'll see it'll appear in this left bar. This bar is all of the features or things that you have made inside of this part studio. So right now this sketch is red, and Onshape gives you hints. Like you'll see right now this box is highlighted blue, which means Onshape is looking for a sketch plane. So because we're making our soda can, let's click on this top plane, or we can also click on it in this sidebar, but we'll click on that top plane, and now you'll see we have a sketch on top of that top plane. Now you can also hit the P key to hide all the other planes if they're ever in the way. Alright, so in the top right, I'm gonna click top to zoom on the top. So our soda can, right? Our soda can was just a circle. So if we look at all these sketching tools at the top, right, I'm going to look for a circle. Now, the shortcut for a center point circle is C. So out here, if I just click C, my mouse has changed to a plus sign. So now I can click once, and then I don't have to hold the click, or you can if you want. But now I can just move my mouse and choose how big I want the circle to be. So let's say about 50, around 50 is enough for my soda can. Now Onshape automatically knows that this entire circle encloses this area. It makes a face. Alright, now I can hit this confirm button at the top to finish my sketch. Now you'll see we have the top view of our soda can, right? But right now our soda can is just a flat shape, right? We want to make it a whole can. We want to use the extrude tool. We want to use the extrude tool because the extrude tool will add material to our 2D face and make it a 3D object. So let's click on the extrude. Whoa, now there's a lot of options here. You'll see, as usual, it got added to our left side where all of our things are. Now there's all of these options. Now, it's kind of self-explanatory, but a solid extrude would make a solid object. A surface would make like a 2D surface, and a thin would make a thin surface. So we want to make a solid can. Click the solid tool since we want to make a solid, and we would hit the new because we're making a new part. You also have all these other ones like add, remove, and intersect, which we'll go into soon, but new is what we're doing because right now we only have a 2D face and we want to make a new part. So now Onshape is giving us a hint again: faces and sketch regions to extrude. So it's asking which faces we want to extrude to make a part from. So this circle right here, we can just click on that, right? And now you'll see it's making an actual part. And there's this setting to blind, all these, we'll just keep it on blind for now. Depth is how far it'll go. You can also drag this arrow to change it. Let's say I want my soda can to be 75. And you can add units here too, or you can just hit enter and it'll go to your default units. But if I wanted to, I could add units such as 3 inches. And that would go to 3 inches, and it'll automatically convert between the units. So for now, I'm just going to change it back to 75 millimeters. I also have all these other settings, which aren't really important for now. The ones that you might use are starting offset and direction. Starting offset is nice because our extrude right now starts from the 2D circle that we made earlier. If we want to start it, for example, 25 millimeters above that circle, you can just click the offset and change that. But I don't want an offset right now, I just want my can. Okay, so now I can hit the confirm button, and now we have our soda can. Now, this looks like a pretty bad soda can, right? Soda cans have a lot more than this. First of all, a soda can isn't a solid shape. A soda can doesn't have any material on the inside, right? So what we can do, we can make a new sketch, And now let's say I want to take off material from the top of the soda can. Let's say I want to make it hollow starting from the top. So I can click that top shape and it will make a plane, right? It'll make a 2D surface on that top that we can then draw shapes on and extrude to create even more. So what I mean by that is now on top of here, right? And I just accidentally confirmed the sketch, but over here, if you go on the side, you can right click and hit edit to get back into the sketch. So on top of here now, for example, we can use our circle tool again. If you hit the keybind C, and if you start hovering over the center roughly of the circle, Onshape knows that you're trying to find the circle and will automatically indicate that in yellow. So you can just click there and it'll automatically go to the center. Let's say I want to cut about 45 out of my soda can. Okay, so now you'll see I confirm the sketch again, and now I can choose this face. I can extrude again, and this time instead of hitting new or add, I can go to the remove tab because I'm trying to make a hole inside of my can. Okay, so let's say we're removing, well, our can was 75 millimeters, right? So we want some material left on the bottom, so let's just take out 70. You'll see that's a decent looking soda can. Okay, so that's a little better. Not much better though. Now, soda cans don't really have perfectly sharp corners like this one does. So what we can actually round those corners out. If you look up here in all of these tools, the two that we could use are fillet and chamfer. So what fillet pretty much does is if I change my radius to, for example, 1 millimeter, and I click an edge, like right here, this is an edge, you'll see that it'll round out that edge to a radius of 1 millimeter. I can change the radius to get more or less of an edge, right? So I'm gonna hit this X because let's say I don't want to do a fillet. The other one we talked about was a chamfer. So a chamfer is like a fillet, but instead of being round, a chamfer will take away flat material. So you'll see that cut off a lot of the top, but that's because right now our distance is set to 5. If we set the distance to a smaller amount, you'll see that our chamfer cuts off a flat corner. So it's all preference. Sometimes you want to use chamfers, sometimes you want to use fillets, right? So for my soda can specifically, I'm going to use a fillet on this top, let's say a radius 2 millimeters, but on the bottom I'm going to add a chamfer. So I'm going to click the chamfer tool, chamfer, let's say this should be 3 millimeters. Alright, and we have just created a very basic soda can. Now let's go into some more advanced sketching tools. So let's start now by making a new part studio. And this will pretty much make me a new blank slate where I have no features and I can add whatever I want. And remember, you always have this part studio 1 still that you can go back to. And you can also right click and rename it if you want to change the name. Okay, so part studio 2. So let's start by making a new sketch on our top plane again. Let's click the P button to hide all the other stuff. Okay, and like before, let's make our circle. Let's click the C button and let's make a circle. Now right now you'll notice that this circle is blue, and anytime a sketch object is blue, that means it's unconstrained, meaning you can move it around. So I can drag this and I can drag this and I can move it around wherever I would like. Now this is not really good since you don't want to accidentally misclick or have your entire sketch messed up just because you can accidentally click and drag. You always want to constrain your sketches. Now to do that, you always have one constrained point right here. This point. This point is known as the origin. You'll see it as the top most point in your feature bar, because this origin is the start of every part studio. So this origin can't move. So let's take the center point of this circle and let's put it on top of that origin. Let's just drag it to the origin. Okay, well now we can't move the center of the circle, right? If I try to click and drag, it won't do anything. But we can still move it, you know, it's still blue because we can still move this outer edge. So what we have to do is somehow make this lock. If you look up here, you have all of these constraints that you can add. The one that we want to use right now is dimension. So a dimension pretty much does exactly what the name says. It adds a dimension to something. So if I dimension this outside circle right here, right, I can give it a diameter. So let's say 15 millimeters. So now, because I put a dimension of 15 millimeters on this circle, it's now locked to 15 millimeters, and from earlier, we locked the center point to the middle. So you can no longer move the circle. It is fully constrained. And Onshape knows that, and you'll see that it turned black, which means it's constrained. And anytime you sketch in Onshape, you always want to make your sketch features black. Okay, so let's delete this circle now. Let's go over some other tools. Line. Lines are very important. If you click the L key, you can make a line and pretty much drag it anywhere you want. Let's drag this up here somewhere. Okay, well, right now, right, this line is blue. I can drag it wherever I want. That's not good. So let's start by giving our line a length. So, like before, we use the dimension tool. This dimension tool can be used on a lot of things in Onshape. So I'm giving this a dimension. Let's say I want this to be 10 millimeters. Okay, now it's 10 millimeters, but I can still move it this way, right? Well, I don't want to do that. So to lock it, if we look at all of our constraints, well, dimension won't really help us. Coincident is like intersecting. That's not really going to help us. Concentric, we don't have circles. That's not going to help us. Parallel, well, there's no other line to be parallel to. That's not going to help us. Tangent, again, we don't have anything else to be tangent to. Horizontal, this one would help us. So let's click the horizontal, and let's click this line, and that will automatically make the line horizontal. I can hit Control Z to undo that, and let's look at the next one. Vertical. I can make that line vertical. And now it's black because it's locked into being vertical, right? And now I can go back and change this dimension to make it shorter, longer, anything I want. Okay, and there's also another line under that called the midpoint line, which pretty much you choose the midpoint and that line branches out in both directions. This is a very nice tool. Okay, moving on from our lines, we have rectangles. There are two types, well, technically three types of rectangles, but the two mainly used are corner and center point. So it's important that you memorize the hotkeys since you might be using these a lot. So a corner rectangle, you can do that by hitting G, which will select the corner rectangle, and I choose one corner, and I choose another corner. Okay, now Onshape automatically knows that this is a rectangle. So I can't really rotate this because then it won't really be a rectangle. I can't rotate these lines. These lines have to be perpendicular to each other. Now I can still move all of these points because it's not constrained. So let's start with the origin, right? Let's take this point and put it here. Okay, well, now we can't move these lines because these are locked to the origin, right? But these lines over here aren't locked to anything. These can still slide. So let's constrain these two. Let's put a dimension tool on them. Let's say I want this to be 10 millimeters, right? So now these two sides are forever 10 millimeters apart from each other until I change that. So those are locked. Now up and down, well, I can still move this. So what I could do is I could add a dimension to this side to stop it from moving, but just to show you what the dimension tool can do, you can also set a dimension between two objects. So let's say I choose this line, which will give me that 10, right? But then I can also click this line down here. And now that I have two selected, it gives me the dimension between the two, right? So let's say I set this to 5 millimeters, right? So now we have a 10 by 5 rectangle that's fully constrained. We can't move it anywhere. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this rectangle. Let's move on. Circles, we kind of went over circles. So circle, you can click C to make a circle and then draw them, and then set a dimension, and that's pretty much it. Arcs are also nice. So before we use an arc, let's start using a line. So I'm going to make a line like this. And if I don't want to use the dimension tool manually, you'll see that this little 5 right here is automatically in this box. And right now, if I just start typing, you'll see I start filling in that box. So I'll put an 8 in that box, for example. Okay, and I'll hit the escape key. Now I have a line with that's 8 millimeters long. Alright, now the 3-point arc, right? You make a 3-point arc with the A keybind. So let's make a 3-point arc. Let's say this is my point 1. Let's say this is the end point of my arc, and the third point refers to the center of the arc, right? So I can drag this, and I'm just going to click like somewhere up here for now. You'll see this isn't constrained because I can drag this center. Both the end points are constrained, right? Because they lie on this 8mm line, but this isn't constrained. So to constrain this, what I can do, I can make it so that this point sits on this line. And to do that, we can use the coincident constraint. And the keybind for that is I. I like to think of this as intersect, I for intersect. So if I hit I can intersect this point with this line. That'll place it on that line. And now I have my arc and it's constrained. Okay. Let's go over polygons. These are also nice. So inscribed pretty much means that there's a circle inside of the polygon. So if I draw a polygon, you'll see that I can choose how many sides it has. Let's just go with 6. Let's make a hexagon. And then you'll see this little box pop up again. I can type in, for example, 5. And what this 5, you'll see that this 5 applied to the circle, right? And then Onshape does the rest automatically and figures out that this to this is 5. These two sides are 5 because the circle is 5. Okay, and we can also change how many sides this polygon has. Say I want 8 sides. I can do that, right? And now a circumscribed polygon is one where the circle goes on the outside. You'll see in this one, the circle, let's choose 6 sides again. The circle this time is on the outside. So 5 still represents the circle, but this time the shape is on the inside. Okay, next, we can look at splines. So splines are like lines, but they're much more advanced. So I can choose my start point. Say I choose another point over here, and then I can add as many points as I want. And I can pretty much make a very complicated curve. But splines are also a little bit annoying to use because this means that you have to constrain every single one of these points. So for example, let's say the distance between these two is 2mm that way, and going sideways 2mm that way. Now you see that point turn black, which means it's constrained, but I would have to go through and constrain every single point. So be careful when using splines. The point tool is pretty simple. The shortcut is Shift plus S by default. You click Shift S and then you can pretty much make points. And you'll notice that these points aren't constrained, but for example, if I make a dimension between these two, and let's say I want to go this way, 4mm. Now, this can still move up and down. So what I'll do is I'll also add a horizontal constraint between these 2 points, right? So I chose that, and then I chose that, and that made the 2 points horizontal to one another. And you'll see that that's constrained now, it can't move anywhere. So let me delete all these. Now, text is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you draw a box and add some text on the inside. Use project is one that's important. We'll get to that in a second. And one of the most important ones is construction. So, oftentimes when you make a shape, Onshape automatically tells when the shape is enclosed, so you can choose that shape. But what if I don't want to do that? What if I want to, let's say I want to make a shape somewhere over here, and I want to put it, like, for example, 10mm away. Well, this is one way to do it. But what Onshape lets you do is construct. So if I hit construction, or the keybind is Q, and then I can choose any of my other tools, right? Just to demonstrate, I'll choose a line. So right now I have line and I have construction selected. I have L and I have Q selected. Now what I can do, I can draw a line as normal, but you'll see this time the line is dotted, which means it's a construction line, right? So again, let's make this line horizontal using the H key, and I'll also give it a length of, let's say, 6. Okay, now this line is a construction line, which means it doesn't actually count to making shapes. And you can also use this on other shapes. For example, if I hit construction, then I hit, let's go to center point rectangle with R. We make a center point rectangle. You'll see that all the lines are automatically dotted, right? And this, because they're dotted, they don't count as actual lines. They're sketch lines or placeholder lines. Now, if I don't have Q selected and I make a normal rectangle, you'll see that it's gray because these are real lines and they make an actual shape. Construction lines are very useful when you're trying to map out where to go. For example, if I want to go, let's say, over this way by 10 millimeters and then up this way by 8 millimeters, and then let's say I want a line that goes this way, right? If these weren't construction lines, I can change them back. If I click the line and then I just deselect that, if I click this line and I deselect or just press Q, you'll see that those stop being construction lines, and that might be problematic because now I have a triangle when all I really wanted was the line. So again, I can click, hit Q to make it a construction line, and I can do the same with the other one too, and that will make it a construction line. So I can choose these two over here. Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty much what construction lines will do. Alright, now some of these other options, sketch fillets aren't really used that much, but pretty much if I have, let's say, a line like this and a line like this, a sketch fillet can, so if you remember from our soda can, right, a fillet is like a curved angle. So like if I add a fillet here, I can curve these two lines. So instead of that sharp corner, I'll turn it into a curve. And we can choose the radius of this, I'll say 2 for example. After that comes the offset tool. So the offset tool might be used when you have something like, say, a line going up, let's say 8 millimeters. This offset tool, if I click this line, it'll offset, but it'll make another line offset from that line, say 10 millimeters apart. And the offset tool is really nice because you don't just have to use one line. If I have, for example, let's make a center point rectangle by clicking R. If I have something like this, right, I can choose all 4 of these lines and I can offset it. And this will make a whole new shape, offset from the original shape. So the offset tool is very powerful. You also have the slot tool under the offset. Now, if I have something like a screw hole, right, but I want to add a slot to it, I want it to go like this. I want it to go all the way like that, right? So what you can do is I can simply add a line, right? Let's say I have a 5 millimeter line. Let's go ahead and slot this line. I choose the slot tool and I just click the line. It makes a slot around that line. Let's say my radius, I want it to be 4. Right, so this automatically made a slot around my line. And you can also make this a construction line if you don't want it to interfere with anything. Alright, now mirror is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, if I have this line, I can draw, let's say, a center point rectangle on this side. I can choose all 4 sides of my rectangle. And I can click the mirror tool, and you'll see Onshape gives me that blue hint again. Select a mirror line. And it wants the line that I'm going to mirror the shape over. So let's say I choose this line. See, it mirrors over. And this mirror constraint pretty much means that these two are mirrored over this line. So if I change this over here, it'll mirror to the other side too. Now there's also patterns. So if I make a circle, I can choose linear pattern, for example. I can click the circle, and then it'll make patterns going in each direction. Let's say instead of just 3, let's say I want 10 circles, right? So now I can drag this or change this number, and I'll have 10 circles. Let's say going upward, I want rows, right? So I can add, let's say I want 5 of these. So yeah, the linear pattern pretty much is a nice way to make patterns. The circular pattern is like the linear pattern, but it just does it in a circle. So if I have a circle like this, and I circular pattern it, all it'll do is if if I choose this number too, let's say I want 5, and then if I drag the center out, you'll see that we now have a circular pattern of circles. Under that, there's also transform tool. So let's say I make a line somewhere over here, but that line's in the wrong spot. What I can do is I can use the transform tool. I can choose that line, then I can move it around, and I can also scale and rotate it. And then when I click off, it'll transform to the new area. So that's the basics of most of the sketch tools in Onshape. So let's start figuring out how to use them. So this concentric pretty much means that it'll make any point, well, if you hover over it, it'll tell you what they do. So if I make 2 circles, one big and one small, and I make them concentric, they'll share the same center point. That's what concentric means. So now these two are locked to each other. And then I could put it on the center to constrain them. I could add a dimension on this, and I could add a dimension on this, and now everything's black, which means I can't move it anymore. It's good. Okay, let's delete this. Parallel, right? If I have a line like this, a line like this, and I want to make them parallel, I can hit B and just select the 2 lines, and they'll automatically become parallel to one another. Similarly, tangent, if I have a circle and a line, right, and I want this line touching the circle at exactly one point, I can use my tangent tool and select the 2, and it'll make it tangent. Okay, horizontal, we kind of went over this. If I have a line and I make it horizontal, it'll just make it horizontal. Same thing with vertical. Perpendicular, which makes a 90-degree angle. So if I have something like this, another line coming out like that, another line coming out like that, and I use the perpendicular tool, I can make the 2 lines perpendicular. If I move this line over here, the other line will stay perpendicular to it. Equal pretty much means same length, and this one's also a very useful tool. Let's say I go in this direction 50 millimeters. If I make another line, and let's say I don't want to add another 50, because this just gets repetitive, right? Now you have 2 50s and it starts taking up a lot of space for the same number. So instead what you can do, you can use the equal tool, select one, select the other, and now these 2 lines are equal to one another. So if I make this one bigger, for example 60, the other one will also grow. Midpoint is also pretty self-explanatory. It'll pretty much move a point to the midpoint of another line. So what I mean by that is if I draw another line out here and I use the M, or if I use the Shift M for midpoint, I can choose this point right here and I can put it on the midpoint of this line. It'll automatically go to the center. Most of these aren't tools that you will use, so we can glance over them for now. Alright, so now let's work on some more complicated shapes. Let's make a wrench. If you don't know what a wrench looks like, let's Google wrench. This is pretty much what a wrench looks like. We'll make a very simple wrench, something that looks like this. Okay, so, right, let's start our wrench from the top plane. Again, I chose the top because I want to look at it from the top, right? So our wrench, let's start from the origin. If I pull up that picture, you'll see the back has a 6-sided little shape. So what did we learn for 6 sides, right? We can use the polygon tool, and let's just use the inscribed one, and then we can drag, and you'll see that Onshape a lot of times gives you these yellow lines. Like you'll see when I hover perfectly over the vertical, it'll give me these lines. And pretty much these are meant to be nice guides that allow you to snap. So there's also one for horizontal, for example. And these guides will help you automatically snap to things like vertical. So I can snap the shape so it's always vertical. Let's say 6 sides. And let's say this wrench has a 5mm flat to flat area. Okay, now you'll see that around this there's a circle, right? On the inside there's a hexagon like this, but on the outside there's a circle. Well, if you look at our inscribed polygon, we already have a circle here. So let's use the offset tool, right? click O for the offset tool, we can offset this circle by, let's say, 2 millimeters, or that might even be a bit much, 1 millimeter. And now we have another circle on the outside. All right, now I want to make the actual handle. So the handle of the wrench is pretty long, right? So it's almost like a rectangle. So instead of actually using this rectangle tool, let's make a rectangle ourselves. So first of all, our rectangle, we'll use a midpoint line. If we do a midpoint line, let's just say we don't have a specific angle. By the way, you can use shift if you want to get rid of those pesky guides that automatically snap. If you hold shift, they'll go away. So let's say our handle is something like that, right? Let's say our handle is 4 millimeters wide. Well, right now this handle would be at an angle. I want to make it straight. So up here, we can use our horizontal, or in this case, vertical constraint to make it vertical. Okay, great. This is vertical. And now what do we do with this? We want to make a whole handle out of it, right? So what we want to do, if we put it just on the circle somewhere, it won't really make sense. We want it to be lined perfectly with the center of the handle. So what I can do, right, I can use the yellow lines as a remembrance tool, right? So if I hover over this point right here and then I drag away, Onshape remembers that yellow point that I was hovering over, and it'll automatically make a horizontal constraint so that these two stay horizontal to one another. Okay, now let's say I want my handle to start over here, right? So my handle will go something like this, right? It'll be a shape like this. But the start of the handle, right now you'll see we have some space left over here where it doesn't connect. So we want this part to connect, right? So what you can do, you can either drag it over and it'll automatically do that, or what you can also do, you can use the intersect tool or the coincident to just do that and then intersect it there, and it'll go there automatically. Alright, so now the two sides of our handle, right? Let's say I want my handle to be, we'll dimension it to be, let's say 50 millimeters long. That's a bit long. We'll go 30. We'll go 40. Alright. Now, instead of also making the top handle 40, right? Remember, we can use that equal. So we can equal these two. And now they're equal to one another. Lastly, we can connect the 2 points here. And then we can, again, use the Onshape remembering feature to put a point exactly in the middle. So if I use my point, right, and if I go on this line, you'll see there's a little square, and that square represents a midpoint, so it'll automatically make a midpoint. Okay, let's look at a wrench again. So the front of the wrench, it also has a hexagon, except in this hexagon, the front side is cut off, right? So it looks something like this. Oops. So it looks something like this, except it's missing a couple of the sides, right? And that allows you to fit something like a hex nut inside. So let's go ahead and make that. And I want this to be off of the middle, right? So what I'll do, I'll hover over this point, and that'll give me that yellow line, which means that whatever I make now is going to be horizontal to that point. So now if I make the shape, let's just say goes something like that, 6 sides. And let's say this one's 7 millimeters wide. Okay, now you'll see that right now it's not constrained because we can move a lot of things. So the first thing we need to do is we need to stop the side to side move, right? We need to figure out an exact distance between these two. We could have made a sketch line between the two, right? And right now the sketch we can move, and this we can also move. So let's use the intersect tool to intersect these two. And then let's put a dimension on this of 5 millimeters. And just like that, this is now constrained, meaning that it can't move that way. However, these outside parts, they can still rotate, right? That's because we haven't told them what angle to go to. So if we look at a wrench, right, this front bit right here, it's a little bit offset, right? So if I have something like this, right? First of all, let's take off 2 of the sides of a wrench. Let's choose these two. Delete them. Okay, this looks a lot better now. However, now these don't connect the lines, which you can fix by using the intersect tool. Yep, so an intersect like that and it's just fixed. Alright, so if I did it perfectly flat like that, that wouldn't look like a real wrench. So in reality, there's a slight bit of an angle, right? So what you can see, right, when this is perfectly flat, you'll see that this line and this line, they're parallel to each other. But in my actual wrench, they shouldn't be parallel. They should be a little bit off from each other. So again, we can use that handy dimension tool. And this dimension tool also works for angle. So I can choose this line, and I can choose this line. And then now it allows me to set a degree angle between the two. So let's say our wrench is set 15 degrees offset. Now, what we can do is we want to make the round part at the front. So remember, again, we already have that circle that we can use. So we can use the offset tool. Offset by, let's say, 2 millimeters. Alright, you'll see that this nicely connects back up over here. But one thing that's a little bit annoying is that this shape right here, it's like enclosed on all sides. And that's because this line, you can just make it a construction line, which will stop it from being an actual shape, and that's just way nicer to work with. Alright, now, the one last thing is that right now, this center part of a wrench, it's not an actual shape. It's just a couple of lines. We need to make an actual hole for the nut to fit in. So what we can do, we can make lines going out this way. Another line going out this way. And we need to somehow keep these two at the same angle, right? So when some things are at the same angle, right, that's called parallel, right? They're parallel. So we use a parallel constraint to make those two parallel. Same thing down here. Okay, now we can just drag and move it onto the circle, or we can use the intersect, the coincident, to just coincident over there. Okay, now you'll see we have this part right here that we can cut out. We have this part, and then this part. Oh, if we actually look over here, like the other side, we have this little shape that's kind of in the way, so we can make it a construction line. Okay, so now we have a wrench. If we confirm our sketch by hitting that plus sign, we can now extrude it all. So we can select everything that we want to extrude. We can hit this extrude button. Okay, and Onshape automatically chose in blue the regions to extrude. Okay, so now we can go on to the other settings. Depth. So this is way too thick of a wrench, right? Let's say I only want this to be like, that's a little too much too. Say 3. Yeah, it looks like a pretty good wrench. Alright. We don't really want to offset or anything else, so we'll leave it like that. Alright, now, a wrench has a lot of curves to it. First of all, this is very sharp right here. So let's start by adding a fillet, right? Shift plus F, fillet. Fillet, choose these two, right? In the blue, choose these two. And a 2 millimeter radius is a bit too high. So let's do something like 0.5. Alright, and that's already looking a lot better. Okay, next up, there's also a very sharp angle right here. So again, we can use our fillets. Fillet this. And let's also choose this one. And on the back side, there's also more. So these two. Okay, let's add, I want a slightly bigger fillet on these. Let's say like 2 millimeters. Okay. Our wrench is coming together. Now, I feel that these inside bits are a bit too sharp. So I might add a tiny little fillet on all of these. And 2 is a bit big, so we'll go something like 0.25. You know what, we'll go 0.5, yeah. Okay, and we can also do that on the back side. We can choose all of these. Oh, okay, we can choose our 6 sides, and there we go. Alright, and right now our wrench looks kind of boxy, so we should round out all these tops and bottoms. So remember, we can use the chamfer or we can use the fillet. If we use a chamfer, and this is too big, let's say for example 0.5 millimeters, it'll look something like that. I personally would prefer the fillet to make it rounded. So we'll go over here, we'll choose this line, and it'll automatically fillet the entire thing because it's one continuous line around the outside. Okay, let's also fill at the bottom, that, and confirm it. And there you go. We've just made a wrench in Onshape. Now, let's go over this window down here. These are all the parts in your parts studio. Once you start adding more parts, they'll add up down here. So, we can right click and we have a bunch of options. Let's rename it. This is my wrench. Okay, let's also give it an appearance. Right now it's blue. I don't really like that blue. Wrenches are a nice gray. So we'll choose this gray. Okay, we're getting there. Now, let's finally add a material. Now, this Onshape material library has a bunch of inbuilt materials that you can use. So a typical wrench is probably made of like aluminum or steel. So let's just say this one's made of steel. It's a very heavy duty wrench. So we'll just choose one of these. I'll just choose the first one. Okay. And now your wrench is pretty much complete. Now, the reason we added the material to it, now we have access to things like the weight of this part. So if we go now to my assembly, right? We've been in the part studio this whole time. Now let's move to my assembly. I could choose insert up here, and I can add in parts from other part studios, or I can actually go to other documents that I have and I can add parts from other documents. So let's say I add my wrench and I add my soda can. If I choose just my wrench, you'll see in the bottom right you have this whole tool right here. If you hit display mass and section properties, Onshape is able to automatically find you the weight, volume, surface area, all this. And this will also work in your part studio. So you have mass and section properties. See that a wrench weighs about 0.01 pounds. Okay, so let's go back to our assembly, right? Now we have two things in our assembly. So this is what I mean, right? Your part studio is where you make the separate parts. We made a soda can, we made a wrench. Our assembly is where you join them together. So a very simple way to join two things is to fasten them together. Up here in all these tools, you have something called a fasten mate. And what a fasten mate will do, it will literally fasten or join together two objects. So if I hit M, and now I have to choose these things called mate connectors. So every face of your part will have a whole bunch of mate connectors, right? So for example, if I look at this circle right here, this edge, the center of that circle is that point right in the middle. So there's a mate connector right there. So let's say I want to mate the bottom of this, so the exact center of my soda can to, if we look at a wrench, right? Let's see, where do I want to put it? Let's say I want to put it right in the center of the wrench too. So I can choose the mate connector right there. Now I've fastened our wrench to our soda can. Now these two are stuck together. So, in short, we covered part studios, the features, we went over sketching, we went over some of these tools. Most importantly, we developed a very strong foundation in using all of the sketch features and making sure to constrain all of our parts. Constraining using things like our horizontals, verticals, tangents. This will save you a lot of headaches in the future. That was all for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, where we will go over basic motion, structure, and hardware components in Onshape, and how you can get an introduction to robotics and how to start CADding for robotics, specifically in Onshape. On a final note, there are many CAD exercises you can find online for practice. You can even think of random objects and try to CAD them yourself. If you ever get stuck on how to use an Onshape tool or encounter a problem, the internet will most likely have the answer. To end, the last thing I'd like to say is that practice is the most important thing. The more you practice with all these tools and all the features of Onshape, the more comfortable you will get and the easier it will get. If you think that you learned something from this video, please take a moment to consider liking and subscribing.